Hello, everybody. Thank you once again for tuning into the In Right Now podcast. I'm your host, John, and today I'm with Dom. Say hello, Dom.
Hey, everyone. I'm happy to be back today.
Yeah, we're happy to have Dom back. It's our first returning guest, and we're going to talk about men's mental health, and he's more than qualified for that today. So we'll get right into it. I have a question for you, Dom, if it's not the third time you've heard this, hilariously enough, but do you believe in our current culture that it still asks of young men to be strong and to not cry? Is that something you could say you've understood?
Yes, I absolutely believe it still does ask young men and men in general to be strong and not to cry. Mm-hmm. I think the messaging around that has changed over the past 5-10 years, when, people, men in particular, are recognizing that men have emotions besides anger.
Yeah.
I think the discussion around it is changing, but I still think men are socialized to, be quote unquote strong, and not show any sort of quote negative emotions, such as sadness, crying, weeping. I think that it's really sinister, in how that operates explicitly and explicitly. I think men now get the message that it's okay to have emotions.
Well, we would hope that
times
more
when
men.
they express them,
right.
The expression for, I think, men and women isn't too much tolerated by the public at large, if that makes sense.
I could agree with that for sure. And we'll get into this soon, but basically the entire focus of this podcast will be around similar experiences between, Dom and I. We've been through plenty of stuff in our life, but I've actually feel more comfortable giving the exact name of my friend who not more recently passed away. It's been just over a year now, but my friend Ben, absolutely, there's a genetic side to why men are seen as creatures that should be more rugged, more bold, and more strong.
Right.
When it comes down to, if you want to just go back in time a little bit, the reason that women aren't involved in the draft and the selective service is because of their biology. It's because if something happens to all the men, at least the women can do something to repopulate. So there's clear differences between men and women when it comes to their biology, and especially societally, how their mental landscape would be, traversed. So it's with that in mind that, I 100% agree with you. Obviously asking this question, I personally do think that there still is a very strong stigma around what's expected of men in our society.
Yes,
within the
definitely.
last 5 to 10 years, exceptionally so as well, however.
Yeah. I think it's changed on the outside. Like, the discussion is people are more open to having that discussion. But when we see those raw emotions in men, it's like, oh, you still have to hide those. You still can't, have a breakdown, or you still can't, not go to work and have a mental health day, right? You still have to be the provider, the breadwinner.
Right, and the societal roles that men usually have to fill, and it's not necessarily they have to, but if they don't, then, to say like another man will. And uprooting your family system because you're not a good enough man is something that's still, and I can't speak with cold hard facts to say this is something that I can say is an issue that's going on currently. I can just say with the past experiences that I've had, especially even being a young individual, being told, real men don't cry. At 5-6 years old, maybe you should have a little chance to cry in kindergarten, But with that in mind, if you don't mind, Dom, I would like to actually pick your brain about some of your experiences as a man, as a person, as a social worker, about the current situation with what I could see as a more dire approach to men's mental health, specifically in the regard of those that don't feel like they're manly enough and that they're failing themselves or their family. Have you run into people that have been able to express themselves in such a way?
Oh my gosh, definitely. Definitely.
Really?
Every day. I think I see that both as a therapist and as a human being in the society.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that, Dom.
Yeah, you mentioned, not being man enough or not being able to provide in a way that fits into society's expectations of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a reflection of really toxic masculinity. I know that's like a buzzword and I don't know, maybe overused. And
that's totally fine. You have the opportunity today for the podcast to determine what toxic masculinity looks like for other people. This is your opportunity.
Yeah. When you were giving me that short breakdown of like that kind of figure of a man who's struggling with that identity. I thought a lot about individualism and the idea of kind of rugged individualism that's sold to us both as men's and I think as Americans uniquely as well. The overarching thought is that, well, you should be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and solve your own problems and fix yourself. And if you can't do that, there's something wrong with you, and you're ill, you're outcasted in some way, and that somehow leads into a shame spiral. And then, men end up not getting any help because they don't want to, appear to be weak or ill. So they don't, go to doctors, go to therapy, reach out to people in their life, which just kind of perpetuates the crisis we're talking about.
And I can 100% agree with that. I have a story actually surrounding that with somebody who is not necessarily truly an uncle of mine or in my family, but somebody who was close enough to me while I was growing up that I referred to them as my uncle. So when I I won't say what exact year, but about 6 years ago, while we were in high school, my uncle, one of my old neighbors, had killed himself after his brother that he lived with for basically his whole life. He was older. He was in his 60s. I think his brother was 60, so he was like a little older. And after his brother died of, I think he had cancer, and he only lasted a couple more months in the house before he shot himself.
Wow.
Now, when we went to his viewing, a funeral or memorial, really, it wasn't, his body wasn't there or anything. It was packed. It was absolutely packed because, he was a good guy and a lot of people knew him. He was well, I won't say exactly, but if you know where the high school is, it's in that town, so it's a pretty small town, so we knew enough people. So it was pretty damn packed. That was probably one of the saddest days of my entire life because the lady that's up there is, speaking a little bit about his truth, about his life, about whatever else, and she goes, does anybody want to say anything? Does anybody have a few words? And this room of maybe, I don't know, almost 100 people squeezed into seats that maybe fit like 50. Nobody said a damn word. And the lady's like, really? Does anybody want to say anything? Nobody wants to say anything. We were just so overwhelmed with feeling that not a person in that room, and I still feel guilty about this, that not a person in that room could get up there and say, this was my whoever. I loved him dearly, and it's too bad something like this happened. But as soon as we got out, my mom starts breaking down. My grandmother was there, and just the whole everything was absolutely sick. And I can see a lot of that coming from the old ways of, he's like 60-year-old. He was probably told plenty of times growing up that, you don't process your emotions in a feminine way. You just stuff them down and you get over it. And when you don't reach out and you have very limited options and you turn to alcohol and all of a sudden you're putting a gun in your mouth in your kitchen, there's not really much you can do outside of, just try again with somebody different. You have to basically entirely rebuild the mental landscape of somebody's perception of themselves as a man. And that's very, if not probably the most demanding thing you could do for somebody else's mental health.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. You talked about, the idea that we should force emotions away or just forget about them.
Right.
Repress them. But, what's unconscious isn't gone. We can force our moods and our anxieties back into, the corners of our brain that we'd rather not think of. But what's repressed returns in very distorted ways, manifesting in, chronic illness, irritability, suicidal ideation, of course, substance use. They'll come out just in worse ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time now. I mean, I was 18 years old. I'll be 25 in less than 2 weeks. And just to think that this person that we were so close with, we had moved away. We hadn't really spoken to him for some time. I hadn't seen him for about 5 or 6 years before he did that. So the last time that I saw him, my Uncle Bill, it's not even his real name, so it doesn't even matter, but my Uncle Bill, the last time I saw him, I was about 13 or so. So, 5 years since I was 18. So about 13, I was down in Pennsylvania at a turkey rifle club. And I just happened to see him. And I was like, hey, do you remember me? He goes, I don't know. Are you this? I was like, I'm John Holmberg. if you remember, like my family members, he was like, "Get the hell out of here." So we took a picture on some track phone because that's how 2013 was rocking those days. And it's really sad, but long story short, the person that I was with, my friends down there, he had a stepdad who was super abusive. So like he took the picture, and we're never getting that picture back. So we have no like memory really of like, we moved when I was like 10 or 11, and so we don't really have anything that's like concrete that like ties us to him at all. So for the past like decade, basically, I've been searching for that picture or for any remnants of, our relationship. But it's sad. It's basically gone forever.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking. But that was a long time ago, and I've gotten over that for the most part because there's not much else you can do. But it was definitely not, it was way harder to deal with the death of my friend Ben, or our friend Ben. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well, because I'm not sure you knew him, obviously. You were, So I want to tell you kind of the story of his life and some of the things that he had gone through and my understanding of his last couple days, or his last day.
Yeah, perfect.
So let's see. Let me just go over my questions quick, because I think I have... Yeah, okay. So I do have a question for you after I kind of give a little bit of an expose about his life. Do you think that Ben's death could have been prevented? Additionally, I guess additionally, I'll tell the story from 2021. So, anybody who's watching, Ben was a very good friend of mine. We spent a lot of time together doing just wacky shit. We were a year apart in school, but we played soccer together. So, for like 5 years, we're in soccer together. We went on school trips together. We went to the United Kingdom and Ireland for 2 weeks. That was incredible. I actually lived with him at one time for for like a year almost. And, we went to plenty of birthday parties together, hung out plenty of times, just did a bunch of stuff together. We were very, very good friends. One of my favorite memories with him, that, we weren't even that close at the time. It had been some time after I graduated, but we went and we saw Avengers Endgame together. And one of my other friends was like, "Oh, sorry, I can't go." And I was like, "Hey, man, do you want to come with us? It's going to be like a big deal." He's like, "Yeah, I love Marvel." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, let's do it. Opening night, let's go see, one of the biggest movies of like the year or whatever." 6 o'clock, packed theater. We're sitting front row at like the Regal Cinema. We could barely see, our necks are aching. But it was such a good experience because, it's a good movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but...
Haven't seen it, but definitely heard.
It's a really good movie. And if you have kept up with all the other movies, like the finale of, a 23-movie saga is a big deal. So I brought him, he had a great time. I introduced him to some other friends that I'm not friends with anymore either, so it's like, terrible, but... Yeah. So in 2021, while we're living together, my business partner and I... So I was going to fire Ben, but he resigned before I fired him. I needed him to do some stuff, and he was just not in a good spot for it, what we later found out. So it was not a big deal. So we had an apartment, and his room was next to our living room, while we had a fish tank right there, because that was one of our businesses. And my one business partner was like, "Yo, dude, you gotta, like, smell his room, because it's pretty bad." And we're like, "Okay, sure, why not?" So you want to, dude, bad. Cigarettes, rotting food, all their types of garbage, just disgusting. Like, you have to concoct a smell like that. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity right there. Like, that is, like, bottle that shit, sell it in a different country. Anyway, it was crazy. It was like, but as we looked into his room and we did invade his privacy, and I'll say this is still one of the meanest things I've ever done to somebody, but it was very necessary. We decided, more so, my business partner was like, "I have an idea," and I was like, "Sure, I'll drive you." So he had said, "Hey, we should go to his parents and tell him what's happening," because, looking at the situation, this guy's room was pretty small, and it was just filthy, and he's like, "You cannot be living in this type of room and doing well mentally at the same time." And I was like, "Fair point, okay." So we went to his parents late at night while he wasn't there. I think he was at work or maybe something different. Oh, no, he was in the Army, so he wasn't even in he was almost out of the state entirely. So he wasn't there, and we went and we talked to his parents, and basically everything that he had told his parents was a lie. So we exposed him for all of his, like, everything he had told his parents that was a lie. We exposed him to their face. One, he had told them he was still in school. He had dropped out of college at that point. They had no idea. Two, he said he still had a certain job he was working. That wasn't true at all. Three, he said he was still working with me. That wasn't true at all. Four, he said he had a car. That wasn't true at all. So it was just like, a house of cards, basically, of all these lies he had built with his parents and whatnot. And that's between them. That is not our business at all. But we saw that his environment that he was living in, his room, was so bad, so nasty, that we thought we had to do something. A lot of it did come from worry about himself, but part of it did come from, hey, if food's rotting into the floor and the carpet, that's going to jeopardize our security deposit. So we did try to put a tone of like, hey, go talk to your son, he's in a bad place, but it's not because he's going to like do something crazy, but we just don't think he's doing well. Little did we, come to find out. So then the next time he gets back, my business partner sees him, and he's like a rough dude. So they start screaming, like getting to a screaming match, like losing their fucking minds on each other. And so I was like, okay, whatever. He tells me about that. Oh, I just got home and Ben was fucking pissed and whatever else. I was like, okay. So I get home, completely change of tone. Ben comes over and he's like, John, thanks, man. And give him a hug. He starts crying in my arms. And then he tells me that, hey, by the way, actually, what you guys did was the right thing to do because I had actually attempted suicide in the past.
Wow.
So that was pretty eye-opening for me because I had no idea. He had told me that he'd taken a bunch of pills out of a medicine cabinet, passed out for about a half hour, woke back up, and just kind of carried on. So now we fast travel to last year, almost exactly 1 year ago, the 16th of November. The 16th of November of 2023, I'm not quite sure exactly why, but I can only assume it was some type of disagreements with his parents or something. But Ben took a handgun, got in his car, went down the road a little bit to a park where I used to play town soccer when I was a young kid, and he shot himself in the head. And I had found out 3 days later because 2 days, after he had done that was actually my sister's wedding. So everybody was able to, because, I was like very good friends with him. But nobody was able to say anything until a day after my mom had come home and she had this look on her face. And there's it's terrible if it's already happened to you, Dom, but if there's people in your life that you've lost, unfortunately, and people have had to break the news to you, you understand the look on somebody's face when it's somebody just died.
For sure.
Very tough. So here's the real punch in the nutsack. It's that, one, he actually killed himself. Two, we went to his parents and told them that was probably going to happen. But three, I had not spoken to him in almost 2 years before that. It was 2021 was when we stopped living together. We, he went into a different apartment with a business partner, or my old business partner, and I just went into an apartment with a girl that I was with. So unfortunately, from whatever interaction I had, the last time I saw him saying like, it was nice living with you, Ben, was the last interaction I've ever had with that man.
Wow. And
that was absolutely terrible. That ruined my life. That was the worst experience I've probably had to go through in a long time. And sorry if I'm putting one more on that pile of numbers, but for the sake of, feeling bad, is that I had shared my own experiences with him, and I told him basically, when you do things like that, when you try to kill yourself, when you get close, you don't actually want that. You think you do, but you get to that last second of it's actually going to happen, and you'll hold back.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to me. I'm flying through the air after I had made up my mind to speed into a tree. I hit that dirt bank, and my car's in the air, 100% in the air, and it was like all time froze. And I jumped out of my body and stood on my shoulder and just kind of looked at myself and was like, "That was a mistake, right?" Because my last words to myself before I hit that tree were no. So obviously, I didn't want to do that, but I'd convinced myself that was the only option I had. So with that in mind, obviously there's a lot of failures in place of the people around him that weren't able to help him out, whether it be his family that couldn't help him at the time, whether it be me who didn't give him a good enough message 3 years ago, 2 years ago, or whatever else. I'll ask you with that in mind now, do you think there could have been help for Ben in preventing his death as well?
Wow.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I'm still digesting the story, and I'm sorry you had to, endure all that. Yeah. It's so horrific for everyone involved.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I have just so you have a little bit more time to kind of think, but I had, because he worked for me as the ice cream business, he did some stuff. I did a test on him one day it was like an idea I had. Basically, it's kind of like two-part. One is to see how good you can follow instructions, and two is to see what you'll do if I don't give you instructions. So I had him draw a picture of just anything. I like to draw, and so I had some material. I like paper and like nice pens. So I said, draw me something. And he drew a submarine, and then I asked him, hey, can add like two things in this regard? And he add like some fish around. Okay, add this now. And he put like an astronaut with like a flag on or whatever. And it's through this, I got to a point where I was like, okay, now add this one more thing. And he did like dots around like the windows or whatever. He's like, okay, done? Am I done? And I'm like, yeah, because, the last test was to see how much longer you'd go without asking, is this good enough? And it was actually a pretty good telling test. I haven't recreated it with anybody else, but that picture is one of my prized possessions, and it's actually hanging on my wall. I'm not even going to lie, it's a pretty shitty picture. He's not the best drawer on the planet, but it looks, it's a submarine going through the water with a guy with the American flag standing on top and some fish going around. That's one of my most prized possessions because, he drew that picture, and we can never get something like that again.
Yeah, that's such a meaningful object, right? It came from his mind.
Oh, yeah.
He made it, and... yeah, one of a kind, obviously.
Yeah, it's not even that crazy. It's just, but the thing is, I have so little from him.
Yeah.
I found a picture back in 2019. I drew a bunch of pictures of like friends and whatever else. Actually, I did your picture. I don't know if you remember. Long time ago, I just drew pictures. I done one of Ben. But yes, I have a picture that I drew of Ben, and I used to have it like right in front of at the end of my bed with my other stuff, but I had to move it because I would just stare at it for hours. And
I bet.
That was really not healthy. So it's in the corner of my room now, but I still look at it now and then. So with that in mind, I know I kind of went on for a little bit longer, but what could we have done to keep Ben around a little longer, in your opinion, your professional opinion?
Right. So many ideas floating around in my mind. But I mean, when you first asked the question, John, it was, do you think Ben's death could have been prevented? And then it kind of transformed to, what could have we done to prevent Ben's death?
Right.
And it sounds like you did most of what was in your ability to do. You went to his parents, and from what I understand, they didn't know the extent to his suffering, and they didn't do much to help him.
No, they really didn't. We didn't even see them after. Basically, my business partner had gotten to me and was like, hey, I spoke to his parents again, and they said they were going to come down and help him clean his room. And we were like, oh, okay, that's a good start. But it wasn't 2-3 months later that his room was basically right back to where it was. The failure on his parents' part. I haven't really spoken to his parents, but the way that I kind of consider things, I could not call myself a parent after something like that.
Right.
When people are coming to you and they're saying, hey, your son is not well and he might kill himself, and then he does that. Goddamn, man. Very tough. Just if there's no better word to describe the situation, it's just tough. It's just hard.
Yeah, certainly. And there, of course, there's other things you could have done as his friend to try to help him.
I mean, I didn't talk to him for 2 years.
Who's to say that they would have worked, too?
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I've had to go through a lot of kind of soul searching to be like, you did a lot more than anybody would have done. So, in my mind, I don't feel bad about his death. I do feel like it could have been prevented. I mean, he literally just, he took a gun, went down the road and shot himself. Like, it takes one person to be like, yo, dude, how about you just keep driving and go to the mental hospital instead? Yeah. But the problem is, like, I believe that, and maybe it's not a problem, but I believe that it was just somebody else's turn to do what I did, 3 years ago. Except nobody's going to do that. And maybe that's part of the problem. We can tie that back into our societal culture of helping people versus helping yourself. And if somebody doesn't want to help themselves, they're not going to have the capacity to help other people or even recognize what needs to be done from people that aren't asking for help. So what really could have been done to prevent his death is somebody else basically, jump in his life and help him out kind of like I did, or see that he's not well and kind of like read his mind, which, that's impossible.
Right. He didn't have those resources at the time.
Right. So maybe that's the better question is, what are some of the resources that we could try to say people should explore if they're dealing with similar problems to which, Ben was? Because Ben's been dead for over a year at this point. There's nothing we can do anymore. But as a resource for other people watching today or listening today, I think it'd be very helpful. Is there any advice you could lend?
Yeah, you kind of hinted on this earlier when you were talking about the moments leading up to his suicide. If there was someone there physically with him, right, to redirect his thought process and then his behavior. I read a study recently that they found the average amount of time that someone thinks about committing suicide before they actually attempt is 5 minutes.
Holy shit, what?
So it's a very impulsive act. And, people think about it for years and, they want to die forever, possibly.
Right.
But the actual attempt tends to only be around a few, to 5 minutes. So I think physically being with someone, you can't force yourself upon someone, right?
Right.
But being there and being accessible when they need you is important too. Not even if you don't even need to have advice or have answers for them, but just being like another physical being in their presence and being able to tolerate their pain and their wanting to die can be suicide prevention too.
I've sat with some of my friends on roofs on places we shouldn't have been and talked them down from, not from them jumping off of that roof, but talked them down from more of a moral high point, a manic high point perhaps. But I could say that preventative measures are a hard thing to evaluate, especially when it comes to a circumstance of in the middle of the night somebody jumping in their car and going and doing something. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to Ben.
Right.
For me, I just got damn lucky. I'll be really honest with you. I really should not be alive. I have no lasting injuries from that crash. That's, my car insurance is outrageously high, and it probably will be for the next 10 years, but so what? I'm not dead. And but that is a good point, that you just can't have you would hope so, that you can have somebody present and that's going to be their suicide prevention. But right. I don't think that a lot of people have access to just like a buddy. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's somewhere we can start if we'd like to help people in this regard and the reason that we're more focusing just strictly on men's mental health is not just because I have these experiences with myself or with, family or friends that have been close or committed suicide, but it's most prevalent, I believe, in the male community, but least talked about in the male community.
Yeah, I would say that's correct. But to go back to what we were just talking about, also, I think there's a misunderstanding that talking about suicide to someone who might be suicidal will actually push them to do it. I've heard that kind of myth a few times, but I think the science says that actually, if you talk about suicide with someone who wants to do it, they're less likely to attempt.
It's not like giving them ideas,
No.
I mean, I can assume that through whatever conversation you would hope to have with somebody, it's not going to be like exploring other avenues of like, hey, don't kill yourself, just hurt yourself. Like that's, I can't imagine that's in whatever data that's collected for this, but in a way of just having an individual present to say anything and to explore, like, what is it? Misery loves company. If you commiserate with somebody based on, your past experiences, or like if you're just there to say, hey, maybe don't do that. I was there and I thought I wanted that, but that's not really what I wanted. Yeah.
Right.
But that's not speaking to somebody about it out of fear because they're going to do something is furthering the stigma that it's not something to be talked about. It's not something to be processed in public, and it's a private individual ordeal.
Right. It's shameful. You should feel guilty about it, hide it away.
Or worse yet, and this is what I heard from somebody that I wanted to punch him straight in the mouth. It's a religious standpoint to say that if somebody is going to kill themselves, that they're not weak enough and that it's a sin to kill themselves. I was having a conversation with a person, an older lady. That's all the information I'm getting because I've never looked at this lady the same after this. But I had a conversation with a lot of people last year after this has happened, and somebody was basically like, well, were they a good man? And I was like, yeah, they're one of my best friends. He was a really good guy. Well, he's got his heart with Jesus now or something like that. And I was like, I don't think he was really like a religious person, but, he had killed himself and this and that. And she's like, well, if he killed himself, then, well, I'll just pray for him. And I want to be like, lady, go fuck yourself if you think you're speaking about my dead friend like that. Like, that is just, like, do not tell him, oh, I'll pray for his soul burning forever in hell. Fuck you. Fuck you, lady. How about that? How about, I hope you reach a similar fate, something shitty, terrible like that, but not truly. I mean, you want to talk about biting your tongue? I'll spit that bitch right off. So.
Yeah, I bet.
I've also had.
Yeah,
dude, this was like a month after it had happened. Again, I was, the meetings I go to. So I sometimes I meet with people that are like, in groups of older individuals. So it's in one of these conversations with the older person, I was like, you are disgusting. Like, you are trying to insert your faith into this discussion about my friend who had, who's dead, who's gone forever. He's dead. And, your prayers aren't going to do anything for him now. Worse yet, I know this is kind of sidetracked, but this is more so like the religious aspect of maybe why a stigma is created strictly around suicide. You want to talk? Let me tell you a side story quick. So in Johnson City, I'm driving by one day, and there's this guy in the if you're familiar with Johnson City by the CVS on Main Street, there's like this little sidewalk area that people could stand in like the middle of the road. It's not actually like the road. It's like it's like a median. It's weird. Anyway, a guy was literally out there. He had what looked like a headset to like a drive-through, and it was connected to the speaker on his lap or whatever, on his waist. And then he had a Bible. And you want to talk about Bible thumping? He's smacking this Bible against his hand, saying, oh, and on the seventh day, this and that. And it's like, this is just obnoxious. So me being a what I like to refer to as most notably a militant atheist, I refer to myself as like a quiet atheist. I don't express my views. I don't try to take religion from other people because, for them, sometimes that's all they have. However, just as well, if people want to push and, give me any type, I'll say it like this. For this situation, the guy was being really obnoxious. I could see the faces on everybody walking around. They did not want it to get preached on random Tuesday afternoon. So I go over to the guy, and my thought process was, I'm just going to talk to this guy. And the more I speak, not into a microphone, the less people have to hear from this guy. So it goes from this guy preaching, smacking his Bible, saying, oh, this, and then repent on the third day, Jesus resurrected or whatever. And then all of a sudden, all you hear is, because I'm just talking my ass off. And, but here's the thing. He told me something that I basically, I spit on the ground before him, and I was like, eat shit, basically. So I had told him, he told me how he got close to his faith and how he was like, oh, I almost got killed by a garbage truck and this and that. He was telling me like how fast he was going. He was like, and if I was going an extra so many meters per second or so many feet per second, I'd be flat and this and that. And I was like, okay, what about the people that actually get killed by garbage trucks? I said, isn't that just like their time, or like, what are you saying basically? And he was like, oh, well, if that was then that would have been God's plan for my kids and for my wife to live without me. And I was like, okay, sure.
Wow.
And so I said, this is a couple years ago. So this is actually before Ben's death. And so I had said, I actually had an uncle who had killed himself, a couple years ago. Can you explain to me basically what God's plan was for him? And he told me that my uncle, not my real uncle, but my uncle had to kill himself so that I could get closer to God.
Are you kidding me?
Nope. This guy told me to my face that it was important for my uncle to die so that I could use that as an opportunity to get closer to God.
That's disgusting.
So I don't remember exactly what I told him, but I basically told him I look for solace every single day, and I'm not going to look towards your religion to find it, you piece of shit.
Right.
But yeah, after that, I was like, I spit on the ground, I cursed him out, I crossed the street, I'm flipping him off. I'm just like, very immature of myself, I'll say. But and the ambition was not to do that. It was just to get the guy to stop preaching in the middle of the road. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, just as well. Yeah, go for it, but you don't need to impose on others. But that conversation there is probably the most erratically and or misunderstandably mad that I have found myself ever.
It's understandable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can understand why I'd be mad, but in the modalities of how I expressed it, like spitting on the ground, like cursing this guy from across the street, jumping in my car and beeping at him as I'm going past, like that was like crazy to me. And I was
that's a good example of how, men tend to have issues regulating their affect and their emotions sometimes.
I mean, yeah, 100%. And
right?
Myself as well, I'm bipolar, so that just set me off basically. But it's very difficult. You don't speak on dead relatives, and especially you don't say, "Hey, that was the right thing to happen. Hey, good for you. Now you have the opportunity to get closer to God. One less uncle." That's just a terribly, terribly. I'm not going to use a vulgar word. I'll just say that's a mean thing to do. That's not very considerate. It's more important for him to spread his faith than it is for him to know that I feel better about the situation. So that's just and that's what I could say is a little bit about a trap towards religion, is that it takes people that are victimized. It doesn't give them an opportunity to feel better. It just gives them an opportunity to feel different. And that difference is, giving it all up to God, when whoever God that is, or whichever God that is.
Yeah, it's really problematic the way religion preys on, the most vulnerable, sort of downtrodden people. That's a whole nother discussion we could get into.
We'll have that discussion sometime for sure, because I to the extent of, I was thinking of having my grandmother on, my Nana, who is a religious nut. Like, right. I don't know if I had this conversation with you. I went over there last week to help them out at their house with a couple things. My grandfather's in a wheelchair. He's got cancer. My grandmother is a woman from the 50s. She doesn't do anything, right? She's very frail. So nothing against women from the 50s, but the ideology has been that women don't really work. The men do the work, but he's in a wheelchair. So what can he do? Anyway.
Certainly, breadwinner, right?
Right, yeah. So she, anyway. So I was over there and we were talking about just like my life and whatnot. Oh, how are you? Good. I've been dealing with some problems with, I spoke about the homeless problem in downtown and why it's been difficult for me to go down there. I mean, I don't sell ice cream there now. It's too cold. It's freaking snow day today. But regardless. And so I was like, yeah, I do have some problems with the populations down there or whatever. And they both kind of were like, oh, yeah. We heard some things going on at the library down there. I was like, oh, yeah. They're like, yeah, apparently some homeless people were either going there to buy drugs or to sell drugs or to meet a man. And I was like, well, one of those things isn't illegal. What? Yeah. Right. I said, well, one of those things isn't illegal. And they're like, well, you never know these days with how people are and this and that. And I was like, I said, well, one of those things you described is being a criminal with, drug trafficking, and another one of them is expressing your sexual proclivities. I said, what's more important to criticize somebody over? Right. They're like, well, how people are these days in this country, and they want to talk about Joe Biden and the Democrats, and it's like, okay, I'm here to leaf blow your ditch and to clean out your shed. Like, why are we talking? But the thing that's like, it's a very old way of thinking. They're very religiously entwined, and so a lot of that hateful language is propagated through the ignorance that's further propagated through religion or through their religion. So that's just a little sidebar, crazy thing that happened. But they were born in the I think they were born in the late 50s. So I think it's like 58, and they just have like I won't use this word, but the R word. Like they use that word like all the time. Like I don't really care. It's not a big deal to me. But for them, it's so easy, and it's just part of their colloquial language to just say that. You know, they were talking about Jeopardy. They're like, "Oh yeah, this guy on Jeopardy is making the other people feel like this," and I was like, "Okay." That's like, damn. But they don't have any clue because they're so out of touch. They're hermits. Right. They don't leave the house. They go to church and they go into their echo chamber and just, you know, hear everything they want to hear every single Sunday. And so it's a very, I would say it's a very dangerous cycle to not seek new information and constantly just confirm your bias of, you know, whatever religion you live in or follow, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. That's a reflection of their views on mental health, right? If they're using that word.
That they don't have a good idea about, you know. And the fact of the matter is, whether somebody truly is, you know, mentally retarded, the word is like not mostly used to describe those people. So you have to understand. That's why I say it's the colloquial use of, you know, they're not actually talking about people that are mentally disabled. They're talking about people they don't like. Right.
It's an insult, right? Because mental health is funny. Mental health is something that can be laughed about and used as, like you said, an insult.
Yeah.
Because that's the culture surrounding it, I think, particularly in that generation, but it's still very much prevalent.
It's boomers. But here's the thing. And I always have to make this distinction because we don't like to isolate people or alienate folks. But for those that are boomers, if anybody's watching, I have obviously two sets of grandparents having two parents. And my I'm not going to say which side of the family, but my grandmother, my Gram, I love you, Gram, has such an opposite opinion of the world than most traditional people her age. It is so enriching and it's just good. It makes me feel a little happy to know that people in her generation do have consideration, or at least have the capacity for consideration towards these people that they're not, you know, so fond of. Growing up, this is kind of like crazy sidebar, but my grandmother, the one I'm speaking of, had a friend while she was in like 3rd or 4th grade who had to get an abortion. And this is like in the 60s and 70s, which like this didn't happen. Right. No, this is in the 60s. So this is like way long time ago. And so this girl, her parents gave her a coat hanger abortion on their kitchen table, and she bled out and died. So if that doesn't further the argument of why you should keep, you know, the government hands off of healthcare, like especially abortions, because it doesn't. This is completely not our topic today, but because it doesn't disallow for abortions, it only disallows for safe and legal abortions. People are still going to do whatever they want with their body. You just
definitely, yeah,
right. So unless we want to go back to that, which, you know, hopefully we don't, but it's for some people living in the state, Oklahoma, but you know, that's a worry. So it's with that in mind that you could either, 1, be of that age and have consideration, or 2, blame everybody else for their own problems. And that's kind of the hypothetical societal weight that they had to live with. That's what things were like. Yeah. If you weren't dealing with your parents having PTSD from, you know, the Korean War, I guess in the 60s it would have been the Korean War from the 50s, and then the end of the 70s, or the middle, I think it was 73 or 75. 1975 was the end of Vietnam, a year before my father was born. So you have this culture where all they know is mental health, all they know is PTSD, all they know, but it's not called that. And it's seen as a personal problem. Oh, my friend came back from, you know, so if my grandmother is 67 now, she just had her birthday a couple days ago. So if she was born in, what was that? Oh, let's do some quick math. I'm not good at math, man, especially doing backwards.
Your grandma's young, sorry.
No, that's fine. So basically right after, you know, very gruesome and bloody wars that a lot of people had, you know, issues with. So it was after World War I, just a quick history lesson, where, what do they call it, like shell shock troops. That's when they first started to understand that PTSD was not a or that there was problems that existed beyond the physical appearance of a person. Your arms got blown off. Okay, you probably need some tourniquet or something. You can't wear your old uniform anymore without crying. Okay, that's because you're a pussy and you should kill yourself because you're not a man.
Right.
That was how things were seen, and that's how things were dealt with by their parents, by professionals at that time. I'll even say it from personal experience. I have an aunt who had dealt with a lot of problems. She's agoraphobic. She couldn't leave the house. She had very wrought with depression. Through our genetics, she is the literal like pillar of everything that we struggle with genetically has been expressed through her genes, unfortunately. She lived with her mom until she passed away at 89 or 86 years old. She lost one of her eyes to diabetes because she's immunocompromised because of just the complexity of her body is just rough. She's in a rough state.
Yeah.
So she's unfortunately, like I said, a lot of the negative mental health genes have been expressed through her. So, but the thing is, she's in her 60s as well. So she was not getting that help when she was young. She was getting cast aside. She was getting put on shock therapy. She was given whatever medications, to where now we find out these medications were doing either one, the exact opposite, two, nothing, or were actual opioids. So it's like, oh yeah, take some methadone. That's going to help your seasonal depression, your whatever it's called, your affective depression, or seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, seasonal affective.
Yeah. So that is just, the difference between how mental health was even seen, if it was seen back in the day 60 years ago, to now the people that are making the rules more likely, in our society or of this age, have zero consideration for what real mental health is like.
Yeah. And, those people who viewed it that way might be gone by now, or they might be, not in positions of power, but those thought processes are still passed down generationally, whether or not we even know it unconsciously. Things that have been ingrained in us kind of slip out of us in ways, in whatever positions we're in the world.
Right. I could say, yeah. I could agree with that, yeah.
That kind of treatment of mental illness might be not in vogue right now explicitly, but I think it's still there implicitly in many, many ways.
I think it's getting better, I'll say for sure. It's certainly better than it was 60 years ago. From my perspective, when I was in fourth grade, I remember I was diagnosed with ADD, which was actually a misdiagnosis. It was just, a bunch of stuff, really, that they thought it was just, he doesn't like to pay attention in school. Yeah, he's got ADD. Okay, nobody likes to pay attention in school, but... So they put me on some medication, and my parents say it made me a zombie, and they never wanted to put me on something like that again. So we actually were on a hiatus of medication for about 5 to 7 years, which was probably a good idea, being like 11 years old. So basically what we found out was that if you're young and you're on these medications, it can alter your brain chemistry forever, irreversibly, irreparably. It can alter your brain chemistry. So that means that if I'm a young kid, and I don't remember what I was taking, but I was taking something apparently strong enough to change my entire personality. My parents said, you can understand how I am so far. You've spent time with me already. You see that I'm like a kind of upbeat guy. I have a personality to myself. They said I was like a wall. I was like, hey, Jono, how are you?
Huh? That's scary.
Yeah. And so being like, not even like 12, 13 years old and being on a medication that turns you into a robot, my parents were like, absolutely not. And so we started on that path of there's got to be something for you that's not out of a pill bottle. And that kind of, helped funnel us into a holistic side of approach for medicine, which is good. I'm happy we did that. But the idea that even 10 years ago, we don't have the same advancements that we do today, but a lot of that is purely based around the stigma that still exists in our society.
Definitely.
I do have a couple more questions. One of them is going to be, you can go off probably, I'm sure, forever about this, but do you have any advice for young men or all men, men in general, say that are dealing with mental health issues?
Any advice?
Oh, yeah.
For them, okay. Wow. It's such a systemic issue that it's hard to put into words what I would say to like an individual person, right?
Sure. For the sake of this podcast, so anybody that's And I'm also going to put the suicide hotline into this video as well. Not necessarily to say that our watchers are, of people that are having issues like that. We can't say introspectively because we don't know you. But if anybody's having type of issues, we're definitely going to put the suicide hotline in there just so, for a basis, if anybody watching this video, they have all the resources they would need.
Yeah, definitely. The suicide hotline is 988 for national. There's a few, but that's one that's reliable.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it goes into gender roles a lot, back to the toxic masculinity. And it's okay to not fit in to the typical image of what a man should be. I think in this day and age, it's almost impossible to fit into that mold. Not that it was ever easy, right? But I think it's okay to question that, and it's okay to not fit into that. And that can be really scary because that puts you in a kind of a gray area, right? If you're not running toward one end of the spectrum, speaking gender role wise,
I get what you
or
mean.
the other end, where do I exist on that, and how do I tolerate that ambiguity that comes along with kind of rejecting both sides of it?
And that's sorry to cut you off really quick, but obviously I spent a lot of time at the drag show selling ice cream, so I got a lot to see a plethora of different people. I've noticed that people that identify as non-binary, usually they express some of both the male dignifications, I suppose, from like society, like male portions, and then there's female portions as well. But I will be damned if all the people that claim they were non-binary did not seem like the happiest people ever. They were just free within themselves to do what they like and exist in their own world, free from judgment, for the most part.
Yeah, letting go of those binaries and those expectations of themselves, I think, is really freeing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say starting with that and giving yourself permission to not, quote, measure up to those standards that we're taught, those are fantasies of what people should be. And I don't think anyone measures up to them in a way that's, perfect or meaningful.
Right. Perfect doesn't really exist. We're all some form of human, I agree with that. Yeah, definitely the perception that you have of yourself dictates your mood, your ideological landscape of what you want to do in life, your ambitions, and where you find yourself. Definitely all through the guise of your perception of yourself starts there. One of my other friends that I had, he would tell me that, I'm not really friends with him anymore, unfortunately, but he would tell me that he had such a terrible negative self-image that when he would go into the bathroom, he could not look himself in the mirror. He said, I just don't want to see that guy, man. I just don't want to see that. He's like, I put on a shirt that I like. I try to wear clothes that I feel good in. But the second I look at myself in the mirror, I just don't want to see that guy. And I know that I have to be him. And that's tough because how do you help your friend that doesn't feel worthy in his own skin? So how do you tell this person, like, dude, you're worth it, man. You're worth it. You're great. You're a great friend of mine, and you deserve to feel safe, happy, and secure. Within your own body as well.
Right, you can tell him that a million times, and it might not even sink in if he's so convinced he's worthless.
So that actually goes perfectly into my next question, which is, what are the best options for help? Obviously, there's a lot of things you can do, but what are some of the best? Because there needs to be a starting point for some people that feel lost. So what's that life raft you could shore out to them?
Oh, I love that question. I was thinking about that in general as we're kind of rolling into the holiday season here. I think the holidays, most people I interface with hate it. It's unbearable for them. So I've been thinking of ways you can kind of like take care of yourself as we go into these sort of uncertain and maybe really intimidating times for people. And there's no blanket answers for this, right? But I would say reach out to your friends, even if it feels awkward, even if you haven't reached out to them in, I don't know, 3, 4, 10 years. I can almost guarantee they'll be happy to hear from you. 100%.
Allow me to speak from experience, Dom, especially anybody who's watching or listening today. I had spoke to my friend Ben in over 2 years, and I can't remember my last interaction with him, but I guarantee if he called me within those 2 years and said, "Hey, John, I'm not doing good. You want to talk?" Bet your ass I would have that conversation with him.
Yeah, definitely. Having friends and having relationships is suicide prevention in itself. So reach out to people, even if, you're not the one suffering. Maybe reach out to them to check in and see how they're doing. I know it's awkward to reach out, cold call, cold text, whatever people say, but embrace the awkwardness, and it's okay to be awkward, and it's okay to express affection or appreciation of your friends. I think with, men specifically, we're taught that, and this goes into I think sexual orientation too.
I was just going to say,
that having close friendships with men is somehow not okay, or somehow makes you gay, or makes you feminine or something. But that leads to men being alone and not having maybe any friends in their lives. So definitely reach out to each other and check in.
Yeah, reach out, check in, health checks, or what are they? Mental health checks. How about this right now? We're almost approaching the hour mark. We'll have plenty more time. But really quick, we're going to do our segment involving all the sponsors and whatever else. And by that, all the sponsors, I mean, one. And that is our sponsor today, Socks with John. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the In When You're Out podcast. I'm your host, John, and here's the Socks with John. I don't have any, I'm not wearing any socks actually right now. I took them off because I don't know why, to be honest with you. But I have Pop-Tart socks. We'll be putting those on screen, I'm sure, or something. But anybody else that would like to be a partner with the podcast, if you want your brand on here, I think I had posted something more recently on our Facebook page that was basically, if anybody would like to collaborate with And When You're Out podcast, if you guys want your brand on here, I will absolutely be able to help you guys out. I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect any product. I don't expect any money. It's just charitable goodwill of saying, hey, I'd like some collaboration between businesses. Hopefully they can both do pretty good together, right? So thank you, everybody, once again. Today's episode is brought to you by Socks with John. I'm not sure where we quite left off. I will just ask you my last question, and then I'll have you go crazy. Do you believe being open and vulnerable is a sign of weakness, or can be seen as a sign of strength?
Oh my God, I do not believe it's a sign of weakness at all.
That's very good.
I think it shows courage, and like you said, it does show bravery to be open and vulnerable, because you're literally showing someone, or a group of people, the parts of yourself that you hide from most people in society, or even yourself at times. So I think that is an amazing feat of strength and courage. So absolutely, yes.
I have to say, while I was in the mental hospital, they said a lot. Well, I mean, this one girl used to say a lot. That the hardest thing you can do is ask for help, or the strongest people it takes the strongest person to understand when they know they need help.
And for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely an easier thing to stuff everything down. But talk more a bit about the dichotomy between how women can traditionally say, or you could say, women traditionally handle their emotions externally and internally versus how men would handle their external and internal emotions. I know this is like a 6 question, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, to start out with that question, I don't think anyone is taught to handle their emotions in a healthy way, men or women, or anyone in between.
Yeah.
But I think women and girls specifically have permission in childhood to show the more vulnerable emotions, to cry, to be upset, to show that they're hurt.
And why do you think that is? I mean, I could probably guess, but why do you think it is that society has conditioned us to believe that women are more valid in their expression of emotion versus that men are?
That's $1 million question. Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly why. I think there's multiple factors. I think the idea that men, once again, have to be the provider and have to be very stoic and productive. And I think in the Western society, we don't view having emotions or expressing emotions as being productive.
Yeah.
So I think that goes into it a lot. let me look at my notes, actually. I think a lot of it's passed down from father to son, too. I mean, I don't really know anyone from personal experience or, my clinical experience that had a father that modeled how to feel emotions besides anger. And a lot of us didn't have fathers around at all, period. So I think we are already missing the template on how to, one, experience emotions, two, how to express them to others, and three, I guess, how to kind of dyadically regulate them with another person. And then fourth dimension, at the same time, men don't know. I hate to paint with a broad brush. Men are uncomfortable tolerating the emotions of other people because we oftentimes cannot tolerate our own emotions to begin with.
That's a really good point. I agree with that 100%. I would say most men, I mean myself, have at some point, it is a general statement to say that most men or all men are dealing with this, but it's just a human emotion. And I would say that, yeah, most men at some point in their life have felt like they either couldn't take on, they couldn't help or be emotionally available because they themselves were not emotionally available to them. They couldn't be in their own brain. They're not going to let somebody else in there.
100%. Yeah.
So when it comes down to how our society treats, say a woman is crying on the street, there's a higher chance or likelihood that people are going to say, hey, what's wrong? How can I help you? Whatever. But if a man's crying on the street, depending on where you are, or depending, your country, your state, your city, whatever's going on at the time, if you're a man, you might be looked over or you might even be judged rather than be seen as somebody who needs genuine help.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot of people, I don't want to say what kind of person, but if someone, maybe the average American, saw a man crying on the street, right? Maybe he looks homeless or looks not friendly in a way. My first thought was that they probably would think he's doing it to get something from them, right? He's being manipulative.
Faking it. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That I'm not gonna lie. That might be one of my first perceptions if I was somebody who had a little bit less consideration towards people. Is that they're trying to get something from me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And I mean, we see women crying in media way more often than men. I think just if we zoom out a lot societally, we're more comfortable with women expressing pain. And, that could be a reflection of misogyny and a lot of other ill dynamics. But we can tolerate women's sadness, not necessarily anger maybe, but sadness a lot better than men. So we're more comfortable with that on a societal level.
Right. I agree with that. Why do you think it is? Where was it in history where women were just the ones who were allowed to feel the emotions while men were never allowed to? Obviously, there's certain societies where, if we go back far enough, the rules change on every frontier. So we can say the ancient Sumerians had a different concept of what, their societal structure would look like between men and women. And then a modern day scenario, it's just as similar or dissimilar. So I would say that, or I guess another question or maybe a thought is, when exactly in history did this kind of point of no return to where it's like, okay, not only can you be, you need to disregard your own emotions, but you need to forever be emotionally unavailable as a man?
Yeah, when you were talking about your grandparents coming from the 50s, I actually thought of this. I think women are expected to bear emotional pain themselves and emotional pain of others better than men because they've ended up being the natural caregivers for their children. And children, before they learn the societal expectations and the norms.
They cry, they whine, that makes
sense.
Sense.
They do the normal human thing, which is to be upset when you're uncomfortable or in pain.
Yeah.
And women have had to be tolerant of that and able to hold that for their kids. And I think men, I'm not sure exactly, I'm not a parent, but I think they've gotten a bit of a pass, and sometimes, they have to go to work and they can't always be with their kids in those very early days.
You would say that, and I could agree with that as well. I think that's a very good point, is that because the women are more naturally nurturers, that they've kind of spent enough time with the children that we've kind of lumped the idea of the way that children express their emotions and the way that women express their emotions is more societally acceptable or allowed. And it seems like it's kind of like a learned difference between
Mm-hmm.
spending more time with children versus having to go and work and provide for your family.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think there is somewhat of a neurobiological aspect to it. I don't believe that men's and women's brains are that much different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they are different in some ways. I mean, there's reasons why, 90% of therapists, for example, are females. I think they can more easily tolerate people's emotions. And they, like you said, they have that natural nurturing drive.
Right.
I think men still have that. It might be a little bit more implicit.
It's a bit suppressed,
toned down.
or at least repressed in our
Right.
society. So my sister is a mother now. She had her baby in March of this year. My niece, I absolutely love her to death, and thankfully for my sister, she spent a lot of time around my wonderful mom, and so she's a great mom. And her husband is actually able to provide for both of them. So at the time being, I think their plan is honestly my sister's just going to be a stay-at-home mom. And she wants to homeschool her child as well, which that's a whole separate thing entirely. But it's a lot more socially acceptable, at least in American society currently, to say that there's a stay-at-home mom versus a stay-at-home husband. I have known stay-at-home husbands, and there's like a little bit of an eek to them when they say that, because I don't judge people. I don't care. But when I met this one guy, I used to work with him. I met him at like Weiss or something. His name was Ryan. It doesn't really matter, and I was like, how are things going? He has 5 kids. He goes, I'm a stay-at-home husband now. My wife's a nurse, and so she's doing this. I take care of the kids. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Do you like it? It's okay, this and that. But it's almost like he needed to and I was a good friend with him, so I was nice to him while we worked together. And he needed to justify it to himself, like for the millionth time before he told me that, yeah, by the way, I don't work. I just take care of my kids. Like, dude, that's fine. Like, a lot of
he had so
people
much
do that.
shame around it.
And maybe he was also somebody from Pennsylvania. He said crick, not creek. So it was kind of funny. This is somebody who, and those that live in Binghamton, if you spend any time in Pennsylvania, you need to understand the difference between that border of going across the border of how people are is like night and day. The differences, not just economically, not just societally, not just the tendencies of people and their humanities, but what the people actually are. It's like a separate entire, obviously it's a separate state, separate culture, but for me it's five minutes this way. And to see such a radical change of ideology and how people treat each other is incredibly, I don't know if it's like ignorant to say, or if it's from a place of ignorance, but it's kind of laughable the way that they approach things versus how we've kind of already handled situations, at least in New York. So it's more conservative for sure. There's worser. Look at me. There is worse education. Worse is a word just not in that context, but worse. I mean, I told you a little bit about last time when I had you on. We had a conversation about some of the people that went to the school down there, and there was. I got to expose a little bit more the serial arsonist, the bears, the person that robbed the gun store. Like these were just like things. They happened all the time. These are just the ones that they happened to tell me about that I remember. And the kid in the cow. Remember I told you that. I met that kid. He is a real person, and he told me, and he was proud. He was proud. This is in the context of what I told Dom, everybody who's watching. But there was a kid who had sex with a cow that he owned, and he made somebody record him because he wanted to brag to people and show it off at school. And he did, and people were impressed. That's the level of like the difference. Like, I'm not going to say we went to school with anybody that was like, yeah, I banged a cow, want to see? Yeah. What the? So,
I get it. I mean, I grew up basically on the state line, and there was a reason why we didn't move over, to PA earlier than we did. But as someone who lived there for 5-ish years, between my late teens and early 20s, there is a cultural difference, for sure. And it's funny in some ways, but it's really disturbing because I think that region has been taken advantage of by industries such as fracking, coal mining. But different episode.
Yeah, that's it. I want to have an episode purely contrasting Pennsylvania from New York, because I spent a lot of time, like my late teens, early 20s. I spent a lot of time in northeastern Pennsylvania, down in New Milford, Halstead, and all we did was, well, I'm not gonna say all we did, but it's a rough place. The fact that, like, weed is legalized in New York and fracking is banned in New York, but you go 5 minutes, south, and it's a completely different world. The only industry that exists in New Milford is basically trucking, and it's all interstate, and it's just, oil refineries from a little farther downstate, or any type of raw material, and that's just going in and out. That's it. It's just trucking. So, yeah, obviously that's going to change the culture, radically between people that are, a state over. But the consideration that you have towards people, you don't live there anymore in Pennsylvania, right?
No, I don't.
Do you mind if I say where you were? Because it's a pretty big area.
I don't care.
Silver Lake is actually pretty nice, but compared to, like, New Milford, you had Silver Lake, which are like some people living on the water or like close to the water.
Yeah,
the lake is very nice. It's pretty upscale. These are older individuals, most likely with money. Then you have people that are like, I live with like 7 people. Half of them are my family. Half of them are my cousins. The other ones are friends that are homeless. And it's like, oh, shit. Okay. And you guys all live out of the same apartment? Yeah, and the landlord's an asshole, but he owns a church, so I can't really say anything to him. It's like, this is a real life situation. My one friend lived right across from the church. We got in trouble a couple times because we would park over there. We saw the same cop, or my one friend saw the same cop 3 days in a row, or 3 times on the same day, actually.
Jeez, yeah.
So hilarious. He got pulled over for like speed. He's going like 40 and like a 30, so he got a ticket. Then he parked in the church parking lot, and they wanted to give him a ticket. He just moved, and then we actually got caught later that night with weed. So it was just like the trifecta. But yeah, the differences between Pennsylvania culture and New York culture are vast. But a lot of the people they get to kind of see both. It gives you a good perspective about how other people are, and you get to change a little bit your consideration towards people you don't know. That's a big deal to me. My biggest concern with people in like a modern day society is that there's less consideration for what you don't understand. You see somebody and they're wearing nice clothes, you start making assumptions about their value or your value towards them and how you're going to respect them. If you see somebody sucker punch somebody else and knock them clean out, you're going to have a different perception about that person. But it's about what you don't know, and it's about what you're willing to say. Even though I don't know, I'll judge them based on, the best I can offer them. That's what a lot of people do not offer anybody on this planet, which is that second chance, or at least, I've said this word how many times, that extra consideration.
It's going below the surface, going beyond certain level assumptions, and considering someone's dignity, right, where they came from, where they're trying to go, and their humility, I think, more than anything else.
I mean, these are hypothetical straw man situations to say, oh, this person with like wearing a suit looking nice, I'm going to judge them differently than somebody that's scrounging for scraps or cigarette butts on the ground, as a lot of people do. But it's not important enough for me to have a perception of that person in my mind based off of what I've seen outside of what they've told me. But just as well, I've spent a lot of time with people that have had, look at, man, I've seen some stuff. I've been in some houses. When I used to do the fish tank business, I've seen some shit, Dom. I've seen some.
I bet.
I don't even want to say real. I'll say for this example because it's not a big deal. Yeah, my standard of will. I'm not going to tell anybody. No, come on, please. Okay, I'll tell everybody. So, the most expensive thing I've ever seen in my life that was not a car or was not a building or a boat, right? So, or a vehicle, I'll just say. Yeah. It is an ivory tusk. It was about 10 feet long in one of our clients' houses, and it was carved. Imagine it's like upwards, so it's like a bow, or it's like a rainbow would be. Yeah. And it's all carved intricately. It's like multiple layers of a Japanese city. Do you know how much that went for? Because that was smuggled into the country back in the 70s when I don't
think I want to know.
Over $250 million.
Jesus Christ.
It is, to this day, the most expensive thing I have ever seen that it was not either a building or a vehicle.
Wow.
His like where the actual fish tank was, it was a 275 gallon tank, which is bigger than your bathtub, which is about 2 of your bathtubs actually. Your bathtubs could probably fit about 100 gallons, so more than that, a lot. You could swim in this thing. You actually could jump in this thing and swim in it. And in his study or in his office, he had all these figurines that were all made of ivory or jade. He had this gigantic carved jade vase that had interlocking loops on it. They have to be carved out of the same stone. You can never create it like that.
Wow.
Some of the shit. But here's the thing. I'm in this guy's house. It's fucking filthy. It is disgusting because this guy is a human being just like everybody else. This guy might have the most expensive things you've seen in your entire life, and probably I can guarantee almost I will never see something like that again. Maybe I will. I don't know. Hopefully that'd be cool. But to see something like a 10-foot long, I don't know, it's probably over 70 years old at this point, like whenever he got it. The person that carved it is long gone. The artist is long dead. However, you even get something like that intricately carved and then smuggled into the United States is beyond me.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll tell you this. I don't really want to give too much information about this person, but he got locked up in a jail in China and got his law degree in that jail. So he's a pretty good lawyer. So, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Anybody that has enough information that can somehow piece together who it is, I don't think you can. Actually, there's one person on the planet that knows, but he's not watching this podcast. Anyway, so I kind of just rambled for a little bit about some expensive bullshit, but yeah, it really just comes down to the societal consideration we have towards people that we don't know, and even when you do understand what people do in their life, if you're willing to judge them or if you're willing to just take them for what they are and kind of be like, all right, I'm going to treat you like the human that you've never been treated like, in some regard.
Yeah, those assumptions we consciously and unconsciously carry around with us get, templates kind of that we transfer onto other people are really sinister and usually wrong.
It's just our bias coming out, and I try my best, especially with the language that we use on the podcast. I try my best to avoid any sense of bias. Mm-hmm. And to understand that we have a bias, you have to recognize that. To be like, okay, I'm somebody who, like I said, I didn't say it's on the podcast, but I'm a moderate. I'm somebody who tries to see both sides of things and not fully, jump onto one side of the political spectrum and say this is where I live now. Simply because political ideologies are propagated through humans. Humans are fluid creatures. We change our minds a lot. Things happen that, okay, maybe I thought this way, now I don't anymore. I will give this opportunity to you, Dom, because well, from my understanding, you're a little bit more left-leaning than I am. I can't imagine you're like communist, like our friend, like we thought back when we were younger, if you remember that.
Yes.
I'd spoken to him actually, and he's not communist anymore. He regards that as like a crazy time of his life. I was like, oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, most people fall into that ideology when they're teens and fall out of it. So
really,
that makes sense.
Yeah, really quick about communism, hilariously enough. So while I Ubered last year, I had this one girl in my car who said she was a communist, and I was like, oh, okay, where's your commune? Because I could tell she was like 15. I was like, what do you know about communism? So she was like, what? I was like, where's your commune? Like, where do you... She's like, oh, it's just me and my friends. Like, we don't have an income, so we're communists. I was like, not having an income doesn't make you a communist. She's like, well, we go and we buy things and we give it to like these group of people that need it. And I'm like, okay, that's not communism. I said, you're buying them, you're paying taxes on them in our government system, which is in our economic system, which is capitalist. I said, there's things that are like, there's social programs that exist in this country. I said, but you really can't be a communist and live in the United States.
Yeah.
At all. Like, you have to basically live in a commune. I said, that's why it's called a community. And that's why it's called communism. You get that, right? It's not just, hey, by the way, I'm communist. No, you're not. You're an American citizen paying American taxes, living in this country. You're not a communist. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's just, communism isn't even, it's socialism, which is the economic factor. Communism is the governing factor of the socialist society.
Right.
So it doesn't even... So to say you're a communist, it's like, it doesn't make sense. You can say... It just doesn't make sense. So she didn't really know what she was talking about. I was an Uber at the time. I was not the person to be like, okay, you you young person, you obviously don't have the education you need to understand what a communist is, but whatever. Not a big deal. Their intention was to buy stuff for people that couldn't buy it. Sure, I guess you're a communist for that. But tell me, Dom, I do want to hear a little bit about how, you have something to say. I want to hear.
You are talking in regard to my politics or something else?
I do want to hear, because a lot of things, obviously, if I'm the host and I have people on, then people understand that it's not necessarily coming from my point of view. So I do want to hear your perspective and where you kind of draw conclusions and how the wires kind of cross in your mind, how things kind of make sense for you.
It's a good question. I've been thinking about this in light of the election, which was like 2 weeks ago at this point.
Yep.
It was hard. Not that I was surprised at all that Trump won, but I was surprised at how many people swung in that direction that, voted, either didn't vote last time or voted for Biden.
Right.
Go
ahead.
I was doing some introspecting because I was telling my partner, like, I know, and people can say, whatever, identity politics, whatever they want to think of this, but
sure.
I know how I will vote in every single election moving forward.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Unfortunately.
Not because that I agree with like vote blue no matter who. Like I'm not in that camp, but I vote based on my own morals, which are unchanging, if that makes sense. I'm not a swing voter. I don't pay a lot of mind to who the candidate is.
Like the person themselves, it's more like what they do or what they're for.
It's more about the party and what they do and their actual policy stances. Like, I think Donald Trump having 37 felonies, that's the least egregious thing he's done. Like,
for me,
he took healthcare away from millions of Americans. Like,
the biggest thing for me is he tried to take over the government in 2021, and we all forgot about that. Regardless, look at convicted felon, paid out or has to pay out however much money to a woman he sexually abused. Secondary to me. It's all secondary to this person is responsible for the first armed rebellion outside of the Civil War in 1861.
Yeah.
The first armed rebellion against the United States Capitol in the history of the United States. And this guy is now going to be the president again. He's used language like, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, but only on day one. And it's surprising that people think that he doesn't have the capacity to do that when, one, he's really old, so he's probably not even making most of these decisions. And two, whoever was there to stop him before, mostly the military or any of the generals, the secretaries that he had gone through very quickly, the criticisms that we could draw from, switching out your cabinet members back from who was it? Andrew Jackson was heavily criticized because of what they regard as the kitchen cabinet, because he was just constantly switching out his cabinet members for people that were more loyal to him. And that was seen as a problem in the early 1800s. So if we're dealing with that today, that there's nobody around anymore that's going to kind of stop him or getting in the way of him trying to dismantle a government system, then I can't trust anybody to get back in there and do the right thing again, because the system's going to be destroyed.
Right. And that's horrifying on every level humanly imaginable.
Go ahead.
His financial crimes pale in comparison to that. So
truly, it's the issue I have is that it's the cult. It's the Trump cult, personality cult.
Right.
And it's gotten to the point now where Trump's been in politics for 9 years about. And it's gotten to the point where people that have some semblance of a Republican ideology are automatically going to be a Trump supporter, because that's all their party is, unfortunately. Like I said, I'm a moderate. I try my best to maintain conservative positions on certain topics, but they make it very difficult, because you can't just say, I'm somebody that thinks there should be less taxes, smaller government, less government overreach, this, that, the other thing. And a conservative, or say a modern day conservative, could say something like, yeah, I agree with that as well. And I could say, you don't, because you voted for Trump. Like, oh, no, there's this and that, and he's good for the part. No, You voted for a billionaire. You voted for somebody who's a convicted rapist, a convicted felon, and who had plans to overturn an election that was lost by, however many millions of votes. You are not a conservative. You are a radical right you're basically part of the radical right wing. You are no longer a traditional conservative. I feel like I'm more conservative than some Trump supporters because their idea of what their ideology is not actually what it is.
It's radical. It's not conservative in any sense of the word.
Donald Trump is the most radical person to ever inhibit the government office that is the presidency ever. Yeah. We have never had a president that says he's going to dismantle the government institutions that have been long lasting. Since the 1930s, the Department of Education has existed, and Donald Trump thinks that in the 110 years, 100 and some years, less than 100 years, that it's been around, that it's no longer the right thing to do. He was not even alive while this decision was made. However, him and his 78-year-old clarity decided that this is now the best move. But the thing is, it's not coming from him. It's coming from the authors of, Project 2025, that we all thought was a joke, that we thought was not actually going to be the policy implemented. But now we see that that's most likely what's going to happen. My father, and somebody important to you as well, I don't know if anymore, is a teacher, is a education professional. Right. My father currently is the vice president of the union. I asked him, I said, what do you think is going to happen for your job? The union has nothing to do with the Board of Education. But basically what's going to happen if we lose the Board of Education is that, New York would just redefine basically their Common Core or whatever. And yeah, that would take a little bit. It would be a shit show for probably like 5 years before they settle on something. Whoop-de-doo. We have pretty good education. We're like 10th in the country for New York, like 10th in the country. Oklahoma. Arkansas, 49 and 50th for education. They are going to be destroyed. If their education is already, we were going to move down to Virginia, maybe, when I was like a 15-year-old. And we constantly were like, you kids aren't going to get a good education because you might have to go to a grade above you because down south, the education is not equivalent to what you've learned in New York. Yeah. And that was very eye-opening to me. And it's more prevalent now to understand that if you remove the very base level of standard for education and you lower it in the states that already are struggling, what then? What happens then? So this is a multitude of problems that are facilitated by a party or by an individual who's hijacked this party. I will say that if you're a conservative, you shouldn't support Trump because that's not the party of small business it's not the party of small business. It's not this party of small government, and it's not the party of less government overreach. You have an individual who is unilaterally dismantling government institutions that have existed longer than any person has existed currently alive. It does not make any sense. We're to the point it's just sticking your head in the ground and saying, I voted for him because I like him more than other people. Sure, good enough. But don't say it's because you support his tariff policies and now you don't get a bonus at the end of your year because your business is going to have to spend more money. Exactly. That is the stupidest shit. Go ahead, Dom. It's your turn now because I just went on forever.
It's okay. I will say about my politics, like I said, it comes down to just morality and basic human decency for me. And people probably might disagree with this, but I fundamentally agree that every human being in this country deserves access to adequate, affordable, and timely healthcare. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say healthcare is my number one issue. Mm-hmm. As someone who's grown up, with a mom who was a teacher, and her healthcare was really precarious, and I never understood why she worked so hard and had shitty ass healthcare. Yeah.
I get that, man. Yeah. I mean, not so much with the healthcare thing, but I understand through. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I didn't want to say it outright, but my father's a teacher. I know your mother's a teacher. Does she still teach?
She does, yeah.
I didn't want to put her age out there and say that she's always trying to approach retirement age, but just as well. But yeah, go ahead, Dom.
Yeah, so healthcare is probably where I was radicalized with my views. I don't know if I were to put myself into a party label. Definitely wouldn't say communist. I don't know, socialist, democratic socialist, social democrat, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
I would say the things that are most important to me are healthcare, again, access to water,
Yeah, that's pretty good.
access to food for everyone.
Yeah.
And then this is probably where I differ from most liberals or Democrats, is that I feel very strongly about the rights of people who use drugs and the rights of people living with mental illnesses. I think drugs should 100% be legalized and recreationalized.
I could agree with that.
For some drugs.
I could agree with that to a certain extent. I will quote, well, I can't really quote a study as time being, but I will say two things as soon as you're ready for it.
Yeah. There's differences between legalization and decriminalization. Sorry.
Decriminalization and regulation, or in legalization.
I think I fall more on the side of decriminalization, because I think for certain drugs, legalization, I mean, we've seen it with weed, right? Yeah. I think not that that's a bad thing. I think it's actually been a great thing, but it opens a door for capitalism to come through and, work its out in ways that are not the best. That's what it does as a system. But I believe in safe consumption sites. I believe in physician-administered drugs. I believe in medication-assisted therapy.
I have some good
100%.
Yeah, so I have some good information in real good regard to actually precisely that. So more recently, our last special guest was Manuel he's from the Bay Area in California. And he had revealed to me information which I thought was like a joke, but no, this is how it goes. So he said the situation is so dire in California and certain parts of SoCal and South California and Bay Area. Right. So he says it's to the extent to where these homeless people or these people that are drug addicts that need fentanyl, the government will give them free fentanyl. And the reason is because if they don't give them free fentanyl, these people will then go and rob places to get money to then go buy fentanyl anyway. Yeah. So the situation has gotten so bad to where they're not even trying to stop people from doing the drug. They're not even trying to stop people from robbing these places. They know that their best option is to just give these drug addicts the drug they need. So if you're a taxpayer in California, in certain areas, I'm sure that your tax dollars are going to buying drugs for junkies on the street. I'm not sure how comfortable you are with that. I know I just used some terms that are not necessarily conducive to a very welcoming environment. But personally, I would be upset if I found out that the money that I was, paying in whatever regards to taxes was literally being bought used to buy drugs for people for free. That would be so ass backwards to me. I couldn't even imagine where to start. But the problem has progressed to such an extent to where they don't really know what else to do. They just don't want people to be killed or, be getting in any type of altercation in somebody's house because they're stealing stuff for drugs. And another thing is in Oregon, I think it was back in 2021. I think when weed was legalized in New York, they did the same thing in Oregon where they decriminalized all drugs. You could carry, I think you could have anything. You could have heroin, you could have anything. And they actually changed that. I think they changed it last year or maybe in 2022. So it didn't last very long. And the reason was they saw that people that weren't using drugs before now had access to drugs. So if you're an individual and you said you have a bad day and you're like, I don't want to drink today. I usually go out with my friends and feel bad about myself at the bar. I'm going to go try something else. This is a hypothetical, not a real situation, obviously. But right. Somebody goes and then they try some drug. It's a gateway drug. They find their way to other places. They've effectively ruined their entire life because of the accessibility to drugs. And I can say that, our capitalist system would absolutely encourage people to spend money on that product. You can't market something without saying, hey, you should come buy it. So, if you're a company that says, we're going to be the people that are regulating how, the community gets their drugs or gets, anything, you've opened the door to a problem that doesn't exist, but only now exists because you're trying to make money off of something. And that's kind of
I don't believe people should try and be making money off of a substance that could potentially kill someone.
However, you have to keep in mind, and this is a problem I had with a lot of the people I used to do things with at the shows, at the concerts and whatnot. A lot of people, they were socialists or they wanted to say they were communists. They didn't like that I was trying to make money in a business. They thought I should be doing things for cheaper or for free, mind you, without ever understanding. a business cannot be sustainable if it is not profitable. If I don't make enough money to go re-up ingredients and make more ice cream, I can't do it. So if people are upset at me for trying to make money, then there's nothing I can do. But if you're upset that I'm making money on a specific good that maybe shouldn't be bought and sold to begin with, you could say that's more personal greed. That I'm disregarding the impacts that selling this good's going to have on the society as a whole versus what I'm just worried about considering my pockets, basically. I'm trying to make money on this. And that's maybe one of the flaws of our capitalist system, is that you can't really promote something without trying to make money on it, because you need to pay taxes. You need to you need to be able to pay for everything on your end that you don't really have the choice to not market it in a way of, hey, everybody should try this.
Yeah. I mean, look at the tobacco industry.
Yeah, exactly. That goes so much deeper though, because there was the disinformation campaign that cigarettes were good for you, that doctors would recommend smoking. Like, that is just, but that is the childhood. That was the time frame that our grandparents had grown up with. And so it's crazy to me that we're at this point in history where the oldest people in our country are running the government. Those that have issues with, they were eating lead paint chips. They were driving their cars with leaded gasoline. They were using asbestos as much as they could. It's crazy that these people now, unfortunately, they've created the system to where they're still in power, making the rules for everybody else with their blatant ignorance. I don't know what else to say, really.
Yeah.
But go off a little bit more with your this is more a political question, I suppose, but where do you say you would place yourself on the political spectrum? Obviously, there's like far right, there's Nazis, and the far left, there's like anarcho-communists.
I've definitely done that test before. Let me look it up. I can see it in my head. I just want the compass.
Yeah, the political compass.
Yeah, definitely left-leaning, probably more on the libertarian side of the left, rather than authoritarian. But I don't know where, how far along on either of those axes I would fall.
So I did that test as well, and it's pretty good, actually. I think I placed myself pretty moderate as well. I try my best. I think it was more left-leaning simply because I don't know. I wanted to take it again because some of the answers I gave are like, I felt like I was forced into answering it a certain way. But I would say that modern politics are askew from what traditional interpretations of ideology would be. And by that, I mean somebody that was a Republican 10 years ago or even 15 years ago probably doesn't align with the modern day Republican the same way. And they might be exactly standing, this is where I find myself on the political map. This is exactly where somebody else says they find themselves, but we don't align politically.
Yeah, and I think same with Democrats, right? On some level, they maybe have gone to the left socially. I mean, even that's kind of debatable. But I think that party has also moved to the right. And the fact that Kamala Harris was being presented as some left, from both sides, being like a champion for the left, but also being called a communist from like conservatives was laughable. Because I thought she was like a traditional conservative, maybe than Trump was.
With her history, and she's a prosecutor, I thought that was going to be something that maybe would resonate a little bit with some Republicans. And there was a good Republican effort for Republicans for Kamala, and there was a lot of endorsements from Republican lawmakers or ex-cabinet members of some of Trump's former cabinet. I found that very interesting, and I do agree that Kamala Harris is very much more of a center left than a left.
For sure. And she's changed that stance too. I don't know if you remember, but I remember in 2019 when she ran for the first time for president, even compared to Bernie, she was left of him on a lot of social issues.
That's interesting.
So no offense to her, but I think she's a little bit spineless in her view. She'll kind of do whatever the Democratic Party
especially with things regarding, and this is a topic that we have not spoken of at all, Israel and Palestine on this podcast. We'll do our best not to speak about that. But I mean, based on that solely alone, I'll say this. I spent a lot of time, obviously, around colleges, and actually up in Cornell, in Ithaca. I used to Uber up there last year. There were plenty of occasions where they had like their camps and their encampments that they were using to basically raise awareness for the genocide going on in Palestine.
Yeah.
So, and that's the language we'll use on this podcast. It's a genocide. It is a culling of a person's, or of a of a certain person based on their heritage and based on where they live. And this is something that, and when you're out, we really don't try to be like the most politically tuned company or podcast, simply because it divides a lot of people, and just by having one stance, a lot of people make assumptions that we're also feeling a different way. So we're going to do our best, but at the end of the day, history will see what's happening with Israel and Palestine as a genocide, and Netanyahu, unfortunately, will be seen as a war criminal. Regardless of how you stand, if you're an Israeli who thinks that he's doing the right thing, if you're a Palestinian who's getting bombed, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what he's doing is on the basis of eradicating another person, another type of people, which is a genocide. But that's, kind of neither here nor there. But I was very surprised that Kamala Harris had kind of a more American ideology, or say like a government ideology of, if we're going to make money on this war, why not send weapons? It's like, yeah, I get it. That's kind of the whole American thing. But we're literally like aiding and abetting a genocide, of people that have more territorial claim to that area than the Israelis from 1948. Sorry to say, but and just as well, I have some people that are like, hey, how are your family in Israel? Because I worry about them. They're fine, they're good, they're not close to anything going on. That's great, that's good. And then I've spoken to some people that are like, oh yeah, not only, is this a genocide of like family I have in Palestine, but I'm also Armenian, and that's even worse. And it's like, oh fuck. So you've been, actually, I got to meet with some people a couple years ago back in 2020 that were protesting, but there's been an Armenian genocide, and this person I got to speak to as I'm Ubering in the back of their car up in Cornell, these people had family that were in Palestine, or like really distant family that were in Palestine, and also they had lost family to the genocide from the Armenians, which that is just absolutely crazy to me to think that this person that's like, not even 30 years old has family history of 2 genocides. That is unbelievable to me. Like, it's 2024. This is the modern age, the 21st century, and we're still talking about genocide. Wow. Very, very different topic for today's discussion for sure. But yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important to have these conversations, especially with people that you don't. I'm not going to say you and I don't see eye to eye. We probably align more politically or socially than most people would to have a conversation like this. But at the end of the day, it is good to have a conversation to know that like there are differences between us, and whatever shape that scope of reality is fine, or it's healthy. We didn't come to the conclusion based on hateful principles or a wrong semblance of ideology that doesn't actually match what the current iteration of it is today. By that I mean, like, say people that are, it's like the Black Panthers, right? Obviously some people have an opinion, say that was like a terrorist cell group.
Yes.
I know terrorism. The definition of terrorism is use of violence for political gain. So in any form, you can say any use of violence for political gain is terrorism, outside of like act of war, because the definition is just different. But just as well, there are people that say they embody the Black Panther ideologies, and obviously that's not going to be to, in whatever regard, whether that be to arm themselves if they choose to, as the right in American, or if they want to organize. That's fine. I personally can't say that I co-sign anything that really happens with like, certain groups like that. I'm not going to say that they should even stop their activities as long as it's not harmful or hurtful to anybody. But it's with that in mind that I can say like, yeah, maybe I support like the idea, but things have changed so much since the first iteration of the Black Panthers that, whatever you consider yourself to be today, just be a good person. And I could say like, more power to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I have thought about the Black Panthers a lot in my life. I've
really
read a lot of their books.
That's interesting.
Particularly, Sada Shakur's book, and then Angela Davis's many books I've read. I think about them a lot, and how I think a lot of their principles and practices can be adopted to the present moment. Obviously, I don't know the complete inner workings of the organization, but I know they pioneered a lot of ways to meet their community's basic needs because the government would not stand up to do so. And I think particularly in the field of social work, a lot of the ideas that are presented as like coming from nice white women, Jane Addams, whatever her name is, the mother of social work, mother of psychology, actually came from Black organizing groups in the 40s and 50s in the U.S. So,
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from the Black Panthers, even if you don't agree with their politics, just from a community organizing basis. There's a lot there.
And that's why I made the comparison of, how things were then versus their applications today. Obviously, there are many institutions that exist now with backings for any type of Black people or any type of minority or anybody who's racially discriminated against in this country. They're a protected class. There's laws that exist that you can't do things. This was like Jim Crow era, back in the 50s and 60s. This was outside of slavery. It was probably some of the worst times to be a Black American in this country.
Right.
And obviously things have changed so much, but we can't. This somehow turned into like we're talking about the Black Panthers and somehow like a promotion of them in some form. But it's interesting that once you have to take things into your own hands as a society or as an individual to get things done that your government won't do. I've had to do that. I've understood that. I've lived that life of, hey, I don't feel like I don't feel like anybody's going to help me out if I don't do what I think needs to get done. And that's the fault of our government, the fault of our elders or whoever's in power. That's kind of the problem. It's very interesting. We went from speaking about men's mental health. We spoke about my friend or our friend Ben, and then now we've somehow, and this is how I like the podcast to go actually, as we start talking about one thing and we kind of just see where it takes us. Now we're talking about the inner workings of the politics from the Black Panthers' inception to modern day somehow. And you have background, you've read books, you're a social worker, you have an understanding. So it's like I love the progression of conversation we're able to host on this podcast. One of the things that makes me happy is the diversity and the inclusion of all the diversity and inclusion of all the different topics that still find a house, in this little show of ours.
Yeah, and the progression to me isn't that far out because I think men's mental health and mental health in general is political. It's inextricably linked from what's going on socially and politically. And one of the messages I think is important talking about men's mental health culturally is that when the mental health of people who are in power, so like white, straight, cis hetero men, when that suffers, we all suffer. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He is clearly suffering from years and years of real injuries, psychological injuries in childhood and a lot of self-esteem issues and just deep set mental issues. And he's taking it out on the most vulnerable groups in the country.
Yeah, that is a way to say, yeah. And I
think these conversations might sound fragmented and disintegrated, but they're actually, one of the same, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I think all of these, everything we've spoken about today is very relevant. And the politics of what's kind of perpetuated the culture of how men act in our society, that goes that kind of does go hand in hand with the problems that people suffer individually based on what sex they were granted from their genetics at birth.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's, at the end of the day, we can say it's just not fair. It's not fair that this burden has to exist, but it's more not fair that men feel like they have to go about it alone most of the time. If there's any message that could be taken away from this podcast today is that if you are somebody, whether you be a man, woman, or however you describe yourself to be, if you are somebody that needs help and you need the type of help that you don't even know how to begin your journey in this healing process, speak to somebody, preferably speak to a professional, medical professional, a therapeutic professional. Speak to Dom. Speak to somebody who has a good idea about how society kind of works and the things that you can't blame yourself for, but you still have to struggle with. And that's the big disconnect between, just talking to a friend and talking to a professional. It's going to give you real step-by-step process of, number one, don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. Number two, these are ideological differences. At the end of the day, you are a person and you should be valued because you're a person. And three, there's a multitude of opportunities for you to be able to help yourself or to find help. So there's never a reason to disregard, a certain modality of healing while others exist. If something doesn't work for you, sure. But I think, like I said, the biggest takeaway is that there are opportunities for you to be helped, and you don't have to do this alone.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that's. I think this was an incredible discussion today, Dom. I'm not sure how much more time you have with me. I do. I don't want to make this podcast go any more, or not any longer, but so much longer than it is now, because it does get a little difficult to edit and upload once it gets to like the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, I bet.
Not a big deal. Right now, I think we should be about an hour and 45 minutes. So, but this has been a really good discussion today. I'm very happy I was able to have you on today. I'm sure we'll have you on again, and we could actually have a more further discussion about politics in general. Simply because, one, I know that you're actually smart enough to hold a conversation with, and two, you're educated. You're not just like, oh, I saw it Fox News. It's like, okay, well, you're like, I read a book, or I saw a study, or I did this or that. So that's very valuable to me. So we'll have you on again sometime for sure, and we can talk about. We'll have a dedicated episode where we strictly kind of throw our principalities aside and say we're only going to talk about American politics today. But like I said, it's just not going to be the forever tone of the podcast. But we've had you on twice now. I'm sure we're going to have you on again, and possibly beyond that as well. What would you say if you would like to come on for if I had a couple different people to speak to on one day?
What would I want to say? Is this in regard to like a political discussion, you're saying?
Oh, I mean, well, that could be fun, but that could get out of hand as well.
Yeah.
I want to have anybody on that's not tolerant enough. I'm more central than you are. You're more left than I am. I would try to find somebody probably right to me. So probably somebody who's like a Trump supporter, but it's difficult because you have to make a lot of exceptions to be a Trump supporter these days. That it'd be difficult to say that even me, I'm a moderate. I didn't vote for Trump. I don't know if you. I know you didn't vote for Trump, if you voted at all. But to have somebody on we'd have to find somebody who's a conservative that did not vote for Trump, because that would you're only slightly left to me. We'd have to find somebody slightly right to me, not the large scale that it is today, but. Anything that you would like to leave our viewers or our listeners with today, Dom? You've been an incredible guest. Like I said, we're going to have you on again, whether it be a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, but something for sure is going to be coming up. Do you have anything you'd like to leave us with today, Dom?
I would say reach out to your friends.
Yes.
Check up on them, even if you haven't talked to them in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say go to therapy, because I think that's
don't
overused as a solution. But I think for this issue, 100% going to one therapy session is good enough. You don't have to commit to anything. It's okay to test out therapists, see what kind of styles you like, what approaches you like. If you're curious at all, I would definitely recommend just swallowing the pill and going to therapy, even just to check it out. There's a lot of resources online. Like there's Psychology Today, which has a therapist directory, so you can find therapists in your area, both online and in person. There's Therapy Den too, which is similar to Psychology Today.
These are good resources. I'll make sure I'll put these in the description for people.
Yeah, and then there's findatherapist.org maybe.
I'll have 3 links to therapy. That's really good stuff. I hope that this podcast will be a beacon of hope to a lot of people, and that anybody who's struggling with mental health issues, or even if you're not even to the extent of, we're talking about suicide, we're talking about taking your own life at 22 years old. That's hopefully not where a lot of people are today, but if that is the case, we hope that this video has been an opportunity for you to find the help you need.
Definitely.
And I'll put it like this as well. Yes, it can be an embarrassing thing to admit that you need help, but at the very least, it's going to be a lot more embarrassing looking down from heaven, realizing that all the people that loved you still love you. As somebody that doesn't even believe in heaven, but just as well.
Right.
You would rather be embarrassed on the phone with one of your friends than them bawling their eyes out at, whatever remnants of a funeral you were offered. So that's my advice. That's Dom's advice. Seek the help that you need. The strongest warriors sometimes get the hardest battles, but just as well, it doesn't make you weak to search for help. Thank you, Dom, for coming on today. I think we had an incredible discussion. We're going to do a couple more things with you for sure. Maybe we'll have you on as a more permanent guest on some occasions. And we'll have a political opinion we'll have like a moderated podcast between me, you, and hopefully like one other person as well. And that'll be like our dedication to at least one political, just video. But like I said, for the 8th time now, thank you very much, Dom. Thank you, everybody. Tuned in today to the In When You're Out podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Take care for now. Adios, mis muchachos. Peace out.
Thank you.
See you guys. Take care.